Thank you very much for such an inspiring lecture. And actually, I couldn't understand were the last slide. Was there questions or answers? So I'm not sure. But perhaps here. The floor is free, so for questions, please, don't be shy. Yeah, please.
Well, I have one question. I have read somewhere that King Valdemar was very cleverly getting out of a sort of a promise or an expectation that a king should go to the Holy Land, he should go south to the Holy Southeast, and that he got out of this obligation or expectation by going to Estonia instead, by which he would have many more interests than just pleasing the Pope and increasing his status in Europe. Is this correct? Because now the way that you are telling the story, it sounds as if that is not the case. As if it was the other way around. Yeah. I thought he got out of having to go to the Holy Land by instead getting papal order permission to go to Estonia.
It is probably reflecting the diplomats and ambassadors of the late 19th and the early 20th century in Denmark. Where you have this, it's a long story, but this diplomacy saying that, you can promise things, but you try to get out of it if it becomes too hot. And it's reflected in the Danish history writing, where all these promises of participating in anything, and they don't do it, has been explained away as they didn't mean it seriously. So it is Valdemar, it is also later in the later Middle Ages, whenever the kings promise to go on a crusade or whatever, and they don't do it, then historians say they didn't take it seriously. They didn't mean it. I don't think that is probable, because there was put so much effort into the negotiations, so much effort into the preparations. You can see that they prepared big armies and whatever. And in this case here, Valdemar actually put some of his highest ranking men into the Mediterranean crusade and sent them to fight in Egypt, and even his own son. So I think he meant it. I can't see any reason why he should not mean it seriously. And then it comes in the Middle Ages again and again that rulers are prevented from actually doing it. The best example is Frederick II, who promised to go on a crusade, and then something happens. But we can see he prepares, he involves, he do all the diplomacy, his having ships built, and then there is an economic catastrophe, or his son is attacking him. So it's so complicated to make these very big expeditions that they can very easily break down. And I think it is, I think that's the case here. I suppose that Valdemar has meant it seriously, that he would like to go to the Middle East if he got the possibility. And then in the end he did not, because of Henry and other things. And it's also, if you look at the career possibilities in the Middle Ages for the big kings, it was a natural step when you get to a certain level to go on a crusade, because it really enhanced the political power and the network and all these things. So I think this that Valdemar didn't really want, and then he took Tallinn instead because it was easier. I think it's very much the Danish cynical historians, those who have been writing in the 20th century. But it's a very firm conviction among historians traditionally.
And thank you very much for this presentation and this fantastic overview. It was amazing and I took photographs of every slide that you presented. Yeah. And thank you for this interpretation about diplomats, how diplomats can also look at history in a different way. and try to see it also in the context of the life that they are in right now. I mean, you could sit and expand even and say, okay, well, the Danish soldiers are also being sent far away to the south or even to Afghanistan in order to fulfill obligations of solidarity of the NATO oath. At the same time, we are also interested in our own neighborhood, so it doesn't mean that because you go far away and promise to go far away and actually do go far away, it doesn't mean that you lose the interest for your own neighborhood to these. So there are quite a few, parallels that you could make from military, from the Middle Ages to military reality today.
And when we talked about diplomats, I didn't talk about you. When I was talking about the way of understanding the diplomacy and politics in general until 1990. And then I think it has changed. If you look at the agenda of the Danish army, until 1990 it was to defend Denmark. And then after 1990 it was it's not to save the world, but it is something to create peace in the world, which is a much broader thing. We can get involved far away from Denmark. So there's a change in how you have understood the role of foreign policy among diplomats, and that has really reflected among historians how they have understood foreign policy in the Middle Ages.
Thank you. Marika.
Thank you for this speech. So I have one comment and one question. So the comment is that this 1,500 ships, it is in the Danish sources, but actually when you read Henry the Livonian, who gives a description of it, then there is no expression that the Danish army was particularly big. So actually, quite the opposite. But another thing is that when we are talking of events before, then what is your attitude to 1206? Because 1206 was also some expedition and different sources and different destinations, and any comment on this?
I think 1206 is interesting because when Valdemar became king in 1202 or 1202, then he started in 02 or 03 to prepare expeditions far away. And it illustrates that it has taken probably these 3 years to raise an army, to do all the practical preparations, so that he could go all the way and build a fort in Saaremaa. And then it was not possible to keep it, so he withdrew. But I think if you read Henry of Livonia carefully, there continued to be Danish expeditions regularly, maybe not every year, but almost. Not by Valdemar, but very much by Albert of Orlamünde, his, nephew, his sister's daughter, sister's son, who also came to have a very important position in Holstein. He was put in to replace the Count of Holstein after 1201. And this is totally irrelevant, but it's a fantastic story. Valdemar had been making expeditions in Holstein in northern Germany year after year after year, and then Albrecht of Schaumburg had conquered Hamburg and was sitting there peacefully, and then on the day of Christmas, Christmas Eve, on the day, Valdemar is standing outside with a huge army and conquers Hamburg and put in Albert of Orlamünde to govern this enormously important area. And Arnold of Lübeck is writing that Albrecht of Schaumburg was totally surprised because everybody had told him that the Danes would sit home and celebrate Christmas and would be totally drunk. So he had not expected any danger. So I mean, maybe not Valdemar had expeditions to Livonia, but he had by proxy, very much by Albert of Orlamünde.
Also this Saaremaa is again against Henry the Livonian, but according to your own sources, it's to Tallinn.
Sorry?
So this 1206.
Yeah.
It can also be to Tallinn because that it was to Saaremaa. It's actually Henry the Livonian again who mentions it because Anders Sullason and Charles were to Riga after that. But that's, thank you.
That's okay, thank you.
So, yeah, please.
Yes. In this context, do you have a take on how and why did Henry of Schwerin succeed in capturing Valdemar? As I understand, the location where he captured Valdemar was not in a border area. It was rather deep in Denmark, and then he managed to transport him through a large part of Denmark to his castle. I've read conflicting interpretations by Danish historians about why this happened, why the Danish ability to react immediately, etc. Do you have a perspective on this?
There are two possibilities. One is the one that Pope Honorius is actually writing to a number of bishops, saying Valdemar was on a hunting expedition, and he was doing that on the small island of Lyø, which is in the southern part of Denmark, because of the wonderful climate on this island. And then suddenly Henry has been sneaking in and catching him and abducted him. That is actually the presentation of the Pope, and somebody must have told him, the Danish nobles, I suppose. But the point is that a lot of the important privileges to Valdemar and the kings before him are today in the Stat Archive, the city archive of Schwerin. It must mean that Valdemar had come with the documents of the kingdom, and especially those privileges concerning Schwerin, to meet Count Henry. So it has been a diplomatic meeting. And if that is, that must be the case, why on earth should the documents until 1223 end up in Schwerin, if it was not on that occasion? And then it means that it has been carefully planned by Henry that he would abduct Valdemar. So he must have prepared his own men, but also some fast ships coming and sailing from Lyø to northern Germany, which is relatively fast, and then he should transport him down and put him in Dannenberg on the southern side of the river Elbe, and then he was firmly within imperial control. So I think it was planned, and it was possible because it was well planned. And we don't know, but Frederick II may have been involved. That's complicated. But one of the early letters from Frederick II, in this case with Valdemar, is describing what happened, and then he said that now he is with our vassal Henry of Schwerin. But Henry of Schwerin was not the vassal of Frederick at that time. He was the vassal of Valdemar. So either it is because they have had a secret deal, or it is because this document has been copied later and then they have changed the title. I don't know, because Henry became the vassal of Frederick later.
So did I understand correctly that sort of the Danish royal chancery or the Danish royal archive up until 1223 mostly was recovered from Schwerin?
No.
That had his office, his archive with him, and then it was left in Schwerin when he was captured there.
This handful of letters that is concerning Schwerin and the other areas around Schwerin, not all really.
These might have just been copies sent to Schwerin also.
Yeah, but as far as I understand, that is not the explanation.
Okay.
So some of them are either the original or the first version.
Okay.
I think it's very much John Lind who has been looking specifically at the different charters and argues that that is the most obvious explanation.
All right, thank you.
And I mean, just to finish that, it is also, if you look at what Valdemar did, he had his son married to the daughter of the brother of Henry of Schwerin. And they had a child, and then they both died, and Valdemar moves in immediately, while Henry of Schwerin is in the Holy Land. He moves in and takes control over all the castles to protect the inheritance of his grandson. So he had really used the opportunity to get a more firm control of the area.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Kurt, again for having our brains circulate. I have a question about what's going on in Estonia during and after the release, during the imprisonment of the Danish king and after his release until, Bonhoeffer. And I guess that's been raised before today, the perspectives of the Danish nobles.
Yeah.
As I understood you claim that the Danish nobles were in negotiations around the conditions for his release. And did I understand you correctly that you think that they negotiated rather would like to pay his ransom than having him, going on a crusade? That's the deal. They would rather pay for him to get back than to see him go.
Yeah.
Because that's the new in Danish, most Danish historiography. They claim that the nobles they didn't want to pay. They stalled the payments and what have you.
Yeah, there are this. They're negotiating on several occasions, and one of them they come and I've forgotten exactly which source it is, saying that they had the money and then they could not agree on the conditions and then they became angry and left on the boats. So it means that what these conditions were, we don't know. But it could be this part of going on a crusade. And it's clear this very detailed agreement with Hermann von Salza and Valdemar. It is presented as a deal they have now agreed upon. And then it is not sealed by Henry of Schwerin, if I remember correctly. So it is looking more like a bilateral agreement, but it is presented as something Valdemar had agreed to and he'll accept and go on a crusade. And afterwards we can see that the nobility, the nobles of Denmark, make another agreement with Henry of Schwerin and get Valdemar out against a huge ransom, where they are pawning everything in Denmark except the crown of Queen Berengaria, but all her other jewels. I think they didn't want him to get away and then let Denmark be open to invasion. As for what happened in Estonia, Stefan, we'll talk about that. Okay, I understand. Yeah.
So I would say that there's also the question of Frederick II and the Count of Schwerin agreeing with each other. And it great seems that the Count of Schwerin did not agree with this deal that Frederick had made with Valdemar.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, and not only my opinion, but also the opinion of several German historians, it was the Count of Schwerin who basically refused to give Valdemar over to the custody of Frederick, and because he wanted to have money.
Yeah, and because they could not agree, because there was a preliminary agreement, or what was called a draft for an agreement between Henry of Schwerin and Frederick II, where he said, you get Valdemar and I get so and so much money, but also that you are rebuilding this castle so I can better defend myself if Valdemar is coming to take revenge. So it may be another example of a negotiation that got to some point and then they couldn't agree.
May I have one? Well, because we're talking about the ransom, but the sum was huge. As far as I remember, it was, perhaps I'm wrong, but so I remember it was 50,000 mark of pure silver, of Cologne marks. It means that Estonia was sold for 20,000 marks, and it was 4 tons of pure silver. So we have to have how much silver I cannot count. 10 tons. 10 tons. Yeah. Was it possible at all? And has it paid out at all, or how it was in fact? So the money for Valdemar, this 50,000 marks, was it paid or not?
I should ask you. You know much more about that.
I know about the money.
I don't know, but I imagine. That you had to come with something like you buy a house 10% or whatever. I imagine that they had to pay a lot in cash, but then the rest must have been negotiated that you pay another 20% when you release the first hostages, and 10 years later another, and maybe even, I don't know, maybe even that some of it was paid as the income from an area.
So
in
there's
20 years.
no documentation about
No,
that?
no,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
not as far as I know.
So, any more questions?
Yes, just once more.
Yeah, please.
I was wondering, because this is a question about, having a plan, and then the reality strikes in and offers contingencies, and you have to revise your plans or whatever. Just, the Danish historiography claims that after Valdemar's defeat at Bornholm in 1227, that is more or less the end of Danish foreign policy, at least for a period, until the next great Valdemar arises. But you state that he is still a very, high-profile figure in European politics, and I think you're right in the sense that in fact one of his sons is later proposed as a potential German king. Nothing came of it, of course, but that points to the fact that, well, Denmark as a realm and the Valdemarian realm is still a factor to be counted on. I think Valdemar, in his seniority, said to his son Eric, might have been, no, don't do that, because it'll bring you a lot of trouble if you go for that position. But well, it was a part of a papally led propaganda to sort of get Frederick II into trouble and stuff like that. So he's a pawn in a greater scheme of European politics, even though he just lost in Bornholm as well.
It is a change. I mean, we must imagine that the Danish king have been vassals in one way or another of the emperor until 1182.
Yeah.
And part of these negotiations was also that Valdemar should now become a vassal of Frederick, and Denmark a fief of the empire. And then this 10, 15 years, 20 years later, a Danish prince is proposed to become king of the Germans. So it is an upgrading in that system. Yeah. And it's also true the popes didn't like Frederick II because he didn't go on a crusade. I have to quote, when he died in 1250, the Pope sent out a papal letter, a bull, opening with the words, rejoice ye heaven and be happy ye earth. And from the book of Isaiah, the tyrant is dead. And I mean, this is really a strong opening in a papal letter about the death of an emperor. So yeah, that was it.
Thank you once more.